today the challenge is to turn literal street trash into couture. From a fabric manipulation technique to sewing, how to make your own trimming, upcycle and all. There is a lot to unpack today. Starting off with your groceries. I'm calling this one Aldi Anomaly. Guess who's back? Chew, I found a bag of clothing on the street, standing in the way here for a while now, thinking, oh yay, I have some clothing to upcycle. At the point I was like, why not upcycle this? Step 1. Deconstruct. And maybe seam rip this open. It looks like it's really easy because they used the pretty big stitching. Call me unpredictable, or maybe it is predictable at this point, but I wasn't quite so sure what we're gonna make yet. All I knew is the fabric manipulation technique in the next step will actually shrink down the fabric significantly. That's why I seam rip all the seams. Then if we get an emergency, it will be a little bit of seam allowance bigger. And don't throw anything away because we're gonna use it almost all. Step 2. Heat. So let's start on the lowest setting. I think it's only one temperature. It's just two different speeds of air. Like the one is blowing harder than the other. At this point, my life is flashing in front of my eyes, questioning my whole life again. It's either gonna be pretty genius or suck. But there's only one way to find out. Well, let's blow, blow, blow. Okay, that's going a little bit quicker than I anticipated. Like we should be on a safe distance to not have it straight away go too far. Oh my god, it's shrinking more than yesterday. What is happening? So this is a textbook example of it's not about the tool, it's about how you use it. On the left you see the highest setting. Straight away melted everything, making holes, not really causing any texture. And the lowest setting of moving the heat gun quickly over it in a little bit of a circling motion. Almost causes kind of smoke-like texture. And the bottom of the bag had a different reaction again because the plastic was slightly thicker. Sort of the stage 1 on this side now, which is where it gets really bubbly, but it's still a little too much like a grocery bag. And this is sort of the stage 2, where sort of all the shine disappears. Here is where it starts to look more interesting. It's really small plastic lines running through, and that's why you get these tiny little holes, which I do like. You always have to know when it's enough with the heat gun too, because before you know it, you entirely destroy it. Just a little bit more.
12 seconds later.
Well, what are we gonna do with this?
See you next time on That's the Question.
Difficultly high fashion. Guys, I don't know if you're seeing what I'm seeing, but I think it might have to be a top after all. I was sure it was gonna be a bag. The whole print is gonna be lost, and actually now that I look at it, I kind of like that it's somehow got a little bit of a painting-like quality. This on the front, this kind of weird girl, Aldi logo like half, it's sort of like a vibe, you know? I hope I'm not delusional. Step 3. Old patterns. Not only meaning that I'm gonna take the pattern of an old upcycle, the only corset of a while ago, but also I was falling a little bit in my old behavior. If you're new here, that means instead of pattern cutting, we were short cutting, probably a little more than we should. Drawing the pattern directly onto the fabric. I'd recommend to just trace a paper pattern first, to a little bit more precision and control. I could not even really find back my line, so that's why I'm cutting like this. The side and back panels I decided to merge into one panel. So my seams are very straight anyway, but if you have a very shaped corset with a defined waist, then realize that that will get lost. Talking about tracing on paper, oh here we are, because it was getting a little unworkable. Proving once again that although my channel is called The Fashion Wreck, it's not always a train wreck, and we actually know the rules, if we want. If you do not own one of those torture devices yet, I highly recommend them. Simply rolling over the seam with these sharp little tools, and you have traced your pattern in no time. And what's so much better about having a paper pattern? Well, if your lines are looking weird, you can now correct them before cutting in the real fabric. I want to keep the upper side with this kind of weird edge. Step 4. Lining up. In case you wonder what this like 10 meters of fabric is, I made my curtains and the lady was like, well, I can give you a little bit more for cheaper, and she gave me like 20 meters of curtain or something. Lucky me, now I have like for another 10 years of white fabric that I literally never use. But as a lining for this corset, I guess it kind of matches. I discovered spray glue as my new... I wanted to say addiction, but I feel like that's irresponsible, don't do stupid things. But it just works wonders for temporary adhesion wherever you need it. And I never realized you could use it so much. So I want to keep the upper edge edgy. This part has got to be about repertoire now, so brace yourself. But yeah, raw edge living on the edge, we're gonna just hold in the lining. Before lining the lining up with the edge, whilst making sure you can't see it from the outside. Step 5. reconstruct. All the pattern pieces are prepared in the same way with the lining folded in. Now we're just gonna close the side seams by simply sewing them together, all layers. And this is where it starts to look somewhat like a corset. If you still think I'm delusional, I forgive you. At this point I was still very much doubting my own sanity too. I don't know if you've been in the sewing store lately, but what in the capitalism is going on there? I might be biased. That's actually really funny of me to say, but you don't know yet. But we're gonna make our own bias tape. Biased. It was funny at the moment I said it. And no, you don't need a bias tape maker. Actually a great way to reuse fabric scraps and leftovers that are a bit bigger, so that you can get the tape out in a diagonal way on the bias. That's why it's called bias tape. Am I mansplaining too much now? What's the advantage of bias tape is that it gets a really flexible strip of fabric as opposed to when you would get it straight out of the fabric. It wouldn't really go nicely around corners or curves. Well, you can cut a straight line, right? So what can go wrong here, you may wonder? Well, everything. So shut up. Just kidding. Not really. But anyway, ends have to look like this. Diagonal, but they are straight out of the fabric. You see, it's already getting weird. And then you can sew the strips together like this. But admittedly, kind of a beginner mistake, but the corners have to overlap for some kind of strange mathematical reason. Otherwise you don't have a continuous line. It should look more like this, one continuous line, folded in half, press, so that we have a guideline on how far to fold it in and press again. And then just fold the edges in one by one towards this middle fold. And this is actually very moldable, so you have to be a little bit careful that you don't press it completely out of shape. Step 6. Finishings. As always, pressing open the seams nicely with the iron. And I already find out that the material doesn't like to be ironed, so I thought to be pretty clever and put the handle in between. Turned out the handle doesn't like to be ironed either. How I found out? Oh my god. For the people in the back, aka myself, use a pressing cloth, that is, any cloth that can get hot, like this cotton tea towel. We've melted enough in step 1 already. Also, small surprise. You guessed it, it was too small. This bias tape would be a disaster to sew on this edge of my thick and like wobbly material. Luckily, making new bias tape is very quick. Well, not really, but it's fun. Well, it actually isn't. Oh my god. If I sound short of breath, is because I'm editing whilst wearing the corset. Who invented this? Who made it? Who is wearing it? So this is the back side. Does it really fit together? Not really, but don't tell anybody. We can make it work. So in the middle back, we want to do grommets. So instead of sewing on a facing, we're just gonna fold in. The back had a lot of handle for some reason, which was actually cool because now we can use them to finish the entire inside of the corset. Just checking if I folded it in correctly. Because I kind of guesstimated, but you actually want to make sure you have enough space for your grommets. So check how big those are. And to add some boning in between as well. I sew the back panels on too in the same way as before, and then I realized we've been procrastinating. Well, to be honest, we've been doing everything in a really strange order. For this sewing project, what I'm getting at is we're almost finished, but now we're gonna decide the shape of the corset in the bottom. And with anything pattern drawing, or in this case directly onto the fabric, if you fold the fabric in half, the corner has to be 90 degrees to not create any strange angles. Oh, I didn't even draw anything. We just go in straight with the scissors, trying to give it a somewhat elegant shape. A lot of artistic freedom. In other words, I've been trying to take shortcuts, and it's really chaotic. I would say you don't have to do that. Do it all in a weird order. The goal is to make it look less like we found a bag on the street, which we did, and we put it on, which we do, but we don't want to make it look too much like we're just wearing a trash bag. Needing a lot of words to say, like I've been chopping a little bit of the bottom and a little bit more, and really trying to shape it to see what looks good on my body. You can obviously see on the seams where how it should be, just holding it. You can adjust it to taste, and it's gonna be important, these kind of details, to make it really look refined, high fashion. Hopefully. So I'm gonna fold in the top of the handle and try to line it up as well as possible with the top of the corset. I just sewed it on the outside with a normal seam allowance. Basically the same as how you would normally do it with the bias tape. I did a little bit of pressing with the iron just to make it easier to sew, but this is not necessary. Then we fold it around and sew from the good side right in the seam, so we catch the other side of the band on the back side. Because what this does is hiding the stitches in the seam and you won't see them from the good side. I mean, magic. Wow. Check, check, double check. Grommet eyelet, boning, fits, yes, then press. We have more handle to handle, so I'm gonna use the longer handles to make the tunnels for the boning. But because they're so wide, I'm just gonna iron them in a little bit. Don't forget extremely low heat on the iron, or use the tea towel. We don't want it to explode. I wanted to shorten my seam allowance a bit to make it fit better under my handle tape band. However, I cut them on a length that was kind of exactly where I wanted to stitch over it later, which made it a lot harder to sew a straight line. You're kind of gonna hop on and hop off of it with your sewing machine. Either make them like super short or a bit longer, but not exactly where you want to stitch later. The spray glue was not spray gluing this time, so I'm using my tape method to stick them as straight as possible onto the seam. Is this how normal people do it too? I have no idea. It's what I came up with last time and it kinda saved my ass. But if you know a better way, let me know in the comments. And do know, just like the other band, I'm folding in the top because we're gonna make it all raw, edgy, living on the edgy, so we need to finish those things nicely. A little bit of a bigger stitch length usually looks better than the sort of small stitch that you normally sew with. Slightly bigger. Look on your jeans, all the top stitches are quite chunky. Depending on what boning you use, you're basically gonna decide how much from the seam you're gonna stitch. I'm gonna use my tie wrap. Those are quite small, so I'll probably create a tunnel that is slightly larger. Final countdown. Now we have the exact same distance from the seam. Oh my god. Bird nesting. Just when you thought your life could not get any worse. That's why it's recommended to do a little test on a scrap first. Reduce the tension quite significantly, and I think now it's sewing. So 2 parallel stitch lines, the same distance from the seam, whilst making sure to catch the handle tape thingy band on the back side. If that sounds complicated, well, what can I say? Rome was not built in one day either. But yeah, so could that have been sewn like looking a little more straight from the back side? No. I said what I said. Only if you see that somewhere, it's not real, it's AI. But anyway, remove the tape gently, not to destroy any of our beautiful stitches. Wave a bit with your lighter just to make it look like you do something interesting. No, but the edgy was looking a little too edgy. Burn away some of the fluff. Then we're gonna sew on our DIY bias tape on the back side, folding it around the edge. First on the good side, sewing right in the fold. So basically you'd have a sort of standard seam allowance. The edge of the bias tape is lining up with the edge of the corset. Cropped a little bit of the seam allowance to make the edge a little bit thinner and the visible bias tape narrower. And then similarly like before, we're folding it around the edge, sewing exactly into the seam whilst trying to catch the other side of the bias tape. So if you see me pulling like a maniac and folding it over and pulling and folding and maybe drip dropping a little bit of saliva, was it really necessary to point that out? 1 minute please, I need to concentrate. Step 7. Boning. Alright, time to cut our boning / tie wraps cable binder situation to size and shovel them into our tunnel. I actually used 2 cable binders per tunnel, and yeah, I thought this would be the easy part too, but it ended up taking hella long because the seam allowance was so hubbly bubbly in the way that it just did not glide. I'm closing the tunnel with just some stitches up and down at the top of each tunnel. So I'm gonna sew 1 more stitch on the middle back to also make a little tunnel there in the fold for my boning. Then I did some quick calculations how much grommets I could add in the middle back. And what can I say? I actually think a miracle might have happened and I'm a mathematical wonder now because the math was right. Step 8. Did that mean I ended up with a perfectly straight line of grommets? 6, 7, 8. That's funny that you ask, but this is not my fault, guys. I literally use a calculator. The calculators are a scam nowadays. That's all I'm saying. Anyways, if you have some grommet hot tips, please drop them in the comments because we can use a little advice. I just cut little holes with my tidy scissors and then press the damn things in. Always, like a few can be perfect, but then there's always a few out of line as well. I don't know. I don't know how to prevent that. Fabric is a little bit thick. I just use this as my little mini fingers. Press it down. Then I can make sure the eyelet is well on there. Then Don't press too hard with this press. Yeah, then you press the eyelet flat. So I decided to do the lace as well in the same blue fabric as before. Here you see how I mean that the corners should overlap a little bit to make it one continuous line. For the rest I'm basically doing the same as the bias tape, except I'm not folding the seam allowance in all the way to the middle of the tape, but just about a small centimeter. And now what I thought was actually a pretty good move is to first spray it in with my favorite new thing, spray glue, so that I can fold my tape and line up the edges really well before even going under the sewing machine and closing it with a top stitch. I mean, clever is clever. Pat self on the back. And if you're still wondering how I'm getting into this alone by myself, well, hardly. I don't think it ever has taken me that long to get dressed. Get someone to do that for you, because now I guess it's looking quite messy. Okay, I don't get it here. Subscribe, like the video, check out my Patreon. Thank you to my Patreon who share it with your friends. Leave a comment, everything helps to give it a little push in the algorithm. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next